Nike has just unveiled the brand new Nike Mercurial Superfly 6 and Vapor 12, and I know what you're thinking, what does the string bag look like? Well, it looks like this. You saw it here first. What's going on, guys? Josh from soccerreviewsforyou.com, bringing you a video today to give you guys my reaction, my opinions, and my overall thoughts on the newly unveiled Superfly and Vapor models, the next generation of Mercurial that we've been anticipating for basically the last 2 years. I think for the most part, the Superfly 5 and Vapor 11 were fairly successful models, but with the new Vapor 12 and Superfly 6, it looks like Nike has made some pretty significant changes. First things first, for those that will ask, yes, I will be reviewing both the new Vapor as well as the new Superfly. I do not have them as of yet, but I'm hoping to have them in my possession, hopefully within the next week or so. So if you don't want to miss out on that review, stay tuned to the channel. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Also hit the little bell notification. You'll be notified as soon as that video goes up. Also, if you're wondering about the release of both of these two shoes, they will be available on February 14th from what I understand. And also from what I've been told, this isn't necessarily public information, the initial first release is going to be fairly limited, at least for North America. So if you really want this first colorway, I would suggest getting them right away because it's very likely that they will sell out within the first couple days, potentially the first couple of hours, depending on how limited they are. Also, if you're wondering about takedown models, those will be available in this new next generation of Mercurials. They just haven't been unveiled as of yet. Likely when the top end models go for sale, we'll get a look at all the takedown models as well, of which there will be low cut as well as mid cut variations following the new Nike naming system. So you'll have the Elite, Pro, Academy, and Club tiers, where the mid cut ones will be called Superfly and the low cut ones will be called Vapor. I'll be reviewing all of those on the channel as well as soon as I can get my hands on them. As for the new Vapor and Superfly, there already seems to be a little bit of confusion around what the actual name is. Nike's own press release has them listed as the Vapor 360 and the Superfly 360, whereas on Nike's website, where they're actually selling the shoes, they have them listed as the Mercurial Vapor 12 Elite and the Mercurial Superfly 6 Elite. So I'm not sure what the official name will end up being on the box label itself, or if it will actually go down as the Vapor 360 and the Superfly 360, completely ditching what number that is within the series. So we'll see what happens there. It's a lot of hand gestures. Now, as we expected, and what we saw a lot of with pros wearing blacked out variations of both the Vapor and Superfly in training over the last few months, the Vapor and Superfly are the exact same shoe. The only difference is that one is a mid, the Superfly, and one is a low, the Vapor. So for the first time basically since the Mercurial Vapor 3, the Vapor is not going to have a Teijin synthetic. Both the Vapor and Superfly feature full Flyknit uppers. Is that a bad thing for the Vapor? I think for a lot of people who are big fans of that Teijin synthetic material and the feel that it has on offer, yeah, you might be a little bit bummed out, because I highly doubt, while I haven't tried either of these two shoes, that they're going to feel like the Vapor 10 or the Vapor 11 or previous Vapor models, because that Teijin synthetic is really thin, it's really pingy, there's pretty much no softness, no padding to it whatsoever, and historically with Flyknit, while it can be very flexible, while it does offer that sock-like sensation, there's always that little bit of a padded sensation to it. So I'm very curious to see how this upper is going to feel, because they really stressed in the press release and just the general information that they've shared so far that the upper is meant to be as thin as possible, basically like a second skin. So we'll see how thin it actually ends up being once I get the opportunity to try them out. Speaking of the Flyknit upper, it features a little bit of a different construction than what we saw from the Superfly 5, which is the previous generation Flyknit Mercurial. It doesn't have any of the speed rib texturing like we saw on the Superfly 5. The upper, for the most part, appears to be fairly smooth, with some slight micro texturing on the surface that's streaking the length of the shoe rather than directly across like we saw on the Superfly and really the entire last generation of Mercurials. So from that perspective, I would expect this upper to be thinner than the Flyknit upper that we saw on the Superfly 5. If anything, this particular upper reminds me a lot of what we saw on the original Flyknit Mercurial, the Superfly 4. Something that's also notably absent on this particular Superfly and this next generation Mercurial versus the Superfly 4 and Superfly 5 is any kind of flywire cable or Brio cable system. It looks like all the structure is within the upper, which leads me to believe that there is a more significant liner, or the material itself is actually going to be a little bit more firmer and a little bit more structured. So really curious to try this out. If I'm going based on looks, it doesn't actually look like this upper is going to be softer than what we've seen from the Superfly 4 or Superfly 5. It looks like it might actually be a little bit firmer, which could be a good or bad thing. Again, until I've actually tried them out, it's really difficult for me to say. The micro texturing on the surface also seems to be a little bit interesting to me. It can be a gimmicky thing. Often when there's any kind of very subtle texturing on the upper, it's not super noticeable on the ball. But if it ends up being anything like what we saw previously on the Mercurial Vapor Flyknit Ultra, which was a limited edition release that we've seen come out a couple times in the last few months, then that's something that's really intriguing to me, because that legitimately had a big impact on touch on the ball, whether you're dribbling or shooting. So I'm curious to see if that kind of a grippy element is also featured on these new Mercurials. Rounding off the upper, obviously you have the option to go mid or low, depending on whether you go for the Superfly or the Vapor. Now the Superfly with its DF mid-cut collar looks to be a little bit lower than it was before, and they talked about this in their press release, that they intentionally made the collar lower, more like the modified variation of the DF collar that we've seen Cristiano Ronaldo wear with the Superfly 4 and the Superfly 5. So it looks to have a very similar cut in terms of overall height. Curious to see how that's going to feel. And then obviously with the Vapor Low, it looks to have a fairly standard low cut, although it does look like the construction around the heel area is a little bit different than the typical low cut shoe that we've seen in the past from Nike. So again, until I've had the opportunity to try all of that out, I really can't say which one's going to feel better or which one's going to feel more comfortable, or if they feel any different at all, because that's entirely possible as well if the heel construction ends up being the same on both of them. From a looks perspective, I definitely think that the low cut version definitely looks a lot cleaner. The fit is another thing that Nike really stressed in their press release, and that is the signature aspect of the Mercurial line, that super tight one-to-one fit. And something that they stressed in their press release that I found to be really interesting is that they said, if your foot slides even 1 millimeter inside of the shoe, you're losing that energy transfer, you're losing that responsiveness, you're losing that connected sensation. And that's been kind of my #1 complaint with a lot of these laceless models that people seem to think is not an issue at all, or people buying mid-cut Nike boots with a one-piece upper and not using the laces. You're getting slippage, you're losing energy transfer if you remove the laces. The idea of these shoes is to be as locked in as possible. So to remove the laces just doesn't make a lot of sense. So anyways, speaking on the fit, they talked about kind of designing this shoe in a completely different way than what they've done in the past. And obviously the Flyknit upper kind of wraps around the bottom because of this new split sole construction, something we'll talk about in just a second. The shape is difficult to judge based on pictures, especially the heavily staged pictures that we have so far. But based on how they look, and again, this is purely speculation, it actually looks to me like this is a little bit wider than what we saw from the last generation of Mercurials. Will that actually be the case? I don't really know, but I'm really curious to see how this is going to fit and how this new upper is going to feel. Now moving on to the sole plate, a lot of people are really shocked about the split sole construction, and honestly I wasn't expecting them to go this route given that they just introduced that Nike plate technology on the previous generation of Mercurials, which honestly I thought that was the best aspect of the last generation Mercurial. But that looks like something that isn't going to be featured on the new Superfly, or at least it wasn't detailed in this next generation of Mercurials. Again, until I've actually had the chance to try it out, it's really difficult for me to say how this is going to feel different from the last generation of shoes, but people really seem to be confused about the split sole design. This isn't necessarily something new from Nike. This was originally seen on the Mercurial Vapor 3. This is a Vapor 3, and similar to that next generation Mercurial, you'll notice that the upper kind of wraps underneath the foot. It's not exactly the same, but this split sole construction is something that we originally saw on this shoe, and it carried over to the Vapor 4 as well as the Vapor 5 until they went back to a regular solid sole plate made out of different fancy materials over the years, starting with the Vapor 6, and now they've gone right back to it. Now with this split sole design, it doesn't mean that there isn't a sole plate, or at least that it's not just hard in the front and hard in the back. There is still a sole plate, it's just covered up by the material of the upper, and then they put what is basically a stud plate on top. one at the heel, and one in the forefoot. That's where all the studs are. Is it going to mean that this is more flexible? No, not necessarily, because there's still a structured sole plate internally. You just don't see it from the outside. So I'm curious to see how that's going to feel, and curious to see how that's going to impact the weight. You would think that doing it this way would actually make the shoe heavier rather than lighter, because you'd have more layers of material. But they also talked about in the press release that they really tried to eliminate unnecessary materials and unnecessary layers. So in terms of weight, it's kind of up in the air right now. I'm assuming they're going to be very, very light, but until I actually have them on a scale myself, really difficult to say. The stud pattern also looks to have been changed, but for the most part, it doesn't look like it's going to actually perform that much different based on how they look, of course. It's very aggressive. It's that same chevron style stud, and they're just more forward facing in terms of their direction and positioning. So the idea here is that they're going to claw the ground as much as possible. And really, with every new generation of Mercurials, the stud pattern seems to get better and better. So I would kind of expect the same type of a leap with this next generation of Mercurials, although I don't think it's going to be that much different than what we have right now with the Vapor 11 and the Superfly 5. Other than that, the only other thing that people have really been commenting on is more so the look of the shoe, which if you haven't tried them, that's the easiest thing to point out. And honestly, I'm kind of on the fence about the overall look. I know people aren't fans of the colorway, and that seems to be the case whenever a brand new shoe launches from Nike or any brand. People are upset about the color because it's just not what they like. But in terms of the design of the shoe, colorway aside, I can't say that I'm a huge fan of the small Nike swoosh that's kind of on an odd angle across the toe. It really reminds me of the older Talaria takedown models from like the Mercurial Vapor 4 generation. For those that remember back that far, I'll try to leave a picture on screen. That's what it reminds me of, which to me just looks a little bit cheap because that was always associated with the cheaper Mercurial as I was growing up. But I definitely don't think that the shoe as a whole looks bad. I think that the mid-cut Superfly variation, the collar is a little bit goofy looking. The low definitely looks a lot cleaner to me, but I'm curious to see this shoe in different colorways. And as we've seen with Nike over the years, they're not afraid to actually change up the look of the graphics and the overall design in terms of the aesthetics of the shoe over the course of its lifespan. So the way that it looks right now might not necessarily be the case 5 or 6 colorways from now. So please keep that in mind as well. But either way, let me know your opinions on the look of the shoe down below in the comments. Do you love them? Do you hate them? Why or why not? The only other thing to talk about is the price, and based on what I've been told by a couple different retailers, the price of the mid-cut version, the Superfly, will be $275, so it'll see a $25 price decrease in comparison to the Superfly 5, which is great. And then the Vapor will technically see an increase in comparison to the Vapor 11, going from $230 to $250. So it'll basically be the same situation as what we have right now with the Hypervenom Phantom 3 Low and the Hypervenom Phantom 3 DF. $250, $275, you pay an extra 25 bucks if you want the collar. And that pretty much concludes what we know so far about the next generation of Mercurial. Again, I'm gonna be working on getting these in for review as soon as possible, so stay tuned to the channel, subscribe if you aren't already, so you don't miss that content on these two top-end models, as well as the rest of the new Mercurial lineup. If you guys enjoyed the video, found it helpful and informative, be sure to support it with a like. If you have any questions for me, as always, leave those down below in the comments, and I'll do my best to get an answer out to you as soon as I possibly can. Subscribe if you haven't already for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. You can find all my social media information linked down below in the description as well. And other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully we'll see you very, very soon with some Vapor 12s or some Superfly 6s, or Vapor 360s or Superfly 360s, or Vapor 12 Elites or Superfly 6 Elites. Nike needs to figure out this name thing. Anyways, we'll see you in the next one.